You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality.
Hello and welcome to a podcast of spurious morality. I'm Johnstone, and with me this week I have Jimmy.
Hello.
And I have Greg.
Hello, everyone.
And we're back for another season by season. It feels like the last one we did was a bit of an epic, sort of 18. It's a long season. It sees off Tom Baker. We did Added Canine and Company. So it's I think we're moving on to a slightly less epic season here. You know, season 18 saw a good chunk of the universe wiped out. We don't quite have anything of that magnitude here. But one thing I do love about season 19 is it does immediately pick up from 18. Castrovalva kind of throws you straight into some post-Legopolis action. And I really like the way it does it. I think it's a really good start. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But first of all, as we do at the beginning of all season by seasons, we will pick a favourite story from this season. So Jimmy, what's your favourite season 19 story?
Well, this might change because it's been a while since I watched the latter half of the season, and we're recording this after I've finished the first half, so it might change, but from memory I would probably pick The Visitation.
It's a cracking story. I can't disagree with that. What about you, Greg?
There's a few candidates. I really do like Kinda, and The Visitation is good, but for me, the best of the season is Earthshock.
I'm in the same boat. There's a lot to enjoy here. I think Castrovalva is great. I do like Kinda. I do like The Visitation. I quite like Black Orchid. But I think it's impossible to just look past Earthshock. It's brilliant. It does everything it wants to do so well. Which it's not a story that we're going to talk about today. That one's for part 2. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to Earthshock because there's an awful lot to talk about. Let's jump into Castrovalva then, first story of the season. As I said before, it picks up immediately after Legopolis. Like, you get the impression that something like 90 seconds have passed between the Doctor sitting up post-regeneration and them sort of running for the TARDIS. We get a pre-title sequence. It's basically a rerun of the regeneration, Tom Baker's final moments. Interestingly, the audio for, I think, Nyssa saying he was the Doctor all the time seems to be different. It seems to be a different take to the one used in Legopolis. But I think this is our first pre-title sequence. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can't think of anything we've had before.
I believe you're right about that.
Yeah.
It depends if you count those bits in Ambassadors of Death where they did a bit of the titles, then a bit of the episode, then the last little bit of the titles. Like, does the mid-title thing count as a pre-title? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not going to count that because it was just cliffhanger from last week, wasn't it? Mostly shown in that bit, I think. So yeah, I'm going to go with no. I'm going to say this is the first ever pre-title sequence in Doctor Who. Then again, it is just the cliffhanger from the previous story, I guess. But it works. It's nice. It kind of sets us up nicely. It just, it reminds us of what did happen at the end of Legopolis and shows us that we are following on immediately from that. Then you've got the titles, and then, like I say, it's sort of 90 seconds later where we're running for the TARDIS, and that maybe it's longer than 90 seconds because it does appear that the Doctor has had time to change his shoes. Or maybe they regenerated with him and we just didn't see. Who knows?
Well, if
But
Hartnell can regenerate his whole costume when he changes to Troughton, it's, why not just the shoes?
and Whittaker to Tennant, of course, was also a complete costume regeneration, so it can be done. One day we'll get an in-universe explanation for that. Like you can just tell that there's a team of Big Finish writers all in a meeting, sat around a table, sort of going, "All right, what's the explanation for this then, and how are we going to solve it?" That will happen
And they
one
can
day.
even call the spin-off Doctor Shoe.
Oh dear.
No, I'm going to accept that one. I like that. That was good.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I'm outvoted. So Castrovalva, like we do have the bit that picks up from the end of Legopolis. We very quickly established that the Master hasn't gone away. I sort of mentioned in the last season by season that the Legopolis, not only does the Doctor lose, but the Master actually escapes. It's a massive loss. But the Master doesn't kind of do a runner. He sticks around and decides he's going to troll the new Doctor. So we have a pretty action-heavy sequence that involves nicking an ambulance and the Master's TARDIS materialising and zapping a load of security guards and all this kind of thing. And Adric gets basically kidnapped, and that's Adric for the story. He's kidnapped. We move into the TARDIS. I think this is the biggest exploration of the TARDIS interior we've ever had. We certainly spend more time there than we do in the Invasion of Time, and we get to see more. It actually looks like the TARDIS and not an abandoned hospital, which is nice. The Zero Room's a pretty cool concept. But yeah, I like the idea that sort of the Master attacks the TARDIS. The threat is kind of within the TARDIS, and suddenly the safe space isn't a safe space to this new and vulnerable Doctor. It's pretty intense. Like the cliffhanger to the first episode of Castrovalva is pretty intense. With them sort of being sent back to the Big Bang. I really like it. I like sort of the fortress is penetrated as a way of introducing the new Doctor. Some nice heavy visual stuff as well. We unravel the scarf. Like, oh, that's a bit of a metaphor there, isn't it? The scarf is unravelled, Tom Baker's scarf. The story does change pace a bit when it shifts to Castrovalva itself. So we're talking kind of midway through the second episode. There's a bit of a shift of pace, and this is almost really two-parters stuck together. In many ways, we've got the TARDIS story and we've got the actual Castrovalva story. Castrovalva's a great concept, loads more brilliant visual stuff going on. So yeah, I really like this one, and I think one thing that works particularly well is this is Christopher H. Bidmead continuing the story. He wrote Legopolis and now he's written Castrovalva, and in many ways it's an 8-parter, is another way of looking at it. So yeah, I think this is great. I think this is the perfect way to pick up after a regeneration. The sort of level of threat never drops from Legopolis. The universe is safe, but the Master is still there. He's still scheming in the background, and he's still being very dangerous and using the Doctor's friends to get to him. And it's just fantastic to see that they're continuing with this new Master in exactly the same way. I like Castrovalva. I like Legopolis more, but I like Legopolis and Castrovalva as two stories. You can even tack Keeper of Traken on there as well. It's a bit of a trilogy, and it's a good trilogy. And I'm glad that it does pick up from Legopolis in the way it does. I think it really benefits the introduction of the new Doctor and everything else that's going on. So Jimmy, talk to us about Castrovalva.
I really do love this story, but I do think it has its faults. I think the biggest fault for me is a bit with the pacing. I think they spent a bit too long on the trying to escape from the end of Legopolis and get back to the TARDIS, and then the TARDIS is falling apart, blah blah blah. It took too long to get to actual Castrovalva and to that part of the story. I mean, I do like it, but I think that first episode drags a bit, and it would have been nicer to maybe pick up the pace there and spend a little bit more time in the TARDIS with the Doctor's recovery and then on Castrovalva itself. But I mean, that's one small quibble. But yeah, overall, I do enjoy it. I think Davison does a brilliant job of playing the still settling in Doctor and his confusion. I particularly love the line where he's saying something about Romana and Adric tells him that Romana's gone. And he just sounds so confused and heartbroken as he asks if she left a note. And it's, yeah, brilliant performance there. And as you were saying about tearing the scarf and the gradual shedding of the old costume, as the Doctor gets closer to the Zero Room and closer to settling into his new persona, it's, yeah, good metaphor. And again, that sort of thing comes back with later on when he's saying about, oh, everyone's looking for the Doctor and he's come to Castrel to look for the Doctor. And yeah, nice metaphor there. Um, and I also like the character moment of the bit where he says when he's studying the fake history books about being fond of history but not getting the time to read. And I thought, yeah, that's a lovely description. There is some funny moments for me that I have to go on. Like, I love at the start, there's this bit where Nissa specifically says in the dialogue that the control for the doors is the only one I know. And then about 20, 30 seconds later, she flicks another control to open the scanner. And it's like, oh, they should have maybe picked up what they were saying there. And also, there's the other thing at the end when, right in the climax, when the Master makes one of the Castrovalvans disappear before it attacks him, but then Sardovan comes swinging on that chandelier going for the web, and he can't just click his finger and get rid of him, and it's a bit like, well, why not? And yeah, it's a bit, it has those little faults, but for the most part, I think it's really handles the new team well and the new establishment of them all and all that set up well. And I also love the scenery in the forest scenes when they're on Castrovalva. But yeah, it's an enjoyable story, but it does have its faults, as I say. So it's yeah, not one of the best of the season, but it's definitely up there. It's, yeah, I enjoy it.
It's definitely far from being a perfect story, I'd agree, but it's quite ambitious as well. I think, in terms of what the script was asking for, and Bidmead sort of knew what was achievable, and I think he just pushed the limits a tiny bit here. And I think for the most part, it works. Like, we've got a good director, we've got a script that is challenging but achievable, and I think there's a lot of really good visual effects work in this that sort of sets it up above a lot of other stuff. Greg, talk to us about Castrovalva.
One thing I was just thinking about, I'm pretty sure this is the only time in Doctor Who history that one season picks up directly on from the last one, like in terms of the plot. Now, I know season 11 to season 12, season 11 ends with, John Pertwee regenerating into Tom Baker, and season 12 picks up right from there, but that's the only commonality between Planet of the Spiders and Robot. I mean, practically all the characters even change, and so this is the only one where like the plot keeps going. Where once the Doctor regenerates, and now we're still on the ground under this secure radio telescope, and we've got to run away. So I don't know. I think that's kind of interesting. It's never really been a show that goes for season-ending cliffhangers in that sense. Now the new series a little different because of the specials and so forth, but still, like one season to another, I don't know if they ever did a full-on season cliffhanger short of just the Doctor has regenerated. Anyway, Castrovalva, I like it. It's good. It's definitely trying to carry on in the same vein as Legopolis, except instead of the doom laden end of an era, we're getting a more you know optimistic beginning of a new era feel to this one. I think from the point at which they actually get into the city of Castrovalva, or whatever city vision, whatever you want to call it, that point on, I think the story is absolutely delightful. I mean, the scenes of like the doctor, getting his memory back, and then slowly trying to explain to the various Castrovalvans why their world doesn't make any sense, and trying to get themselves to step outside of their own perspectives. Like, that's all really interesting stuff, and that leads to Shardovan, who's a great character. You made us man of evil, but now we are free. I mean, just these creations of the master that gain their own independent thought and belief, and I think that stuff is just great. And I really think it lets Peter Davison come into his own, as his doctor. Like, I think, by the end of the story, you're starting to get a good idea of who this doctor is. And I think the ending with the master being sealed away with his own creations is great. It's a nice way for the trilogy to end. The master's own ambition wrecks him, as it so often has. The problem with Castrovalva, the story, is the stuff before they get into Castrovalva, which is, none of it's like a bad idea. It's just it's way too long and too static. Like, okay, so at the first part, they're running away from the guards, and then like they watch on the scanner as like the master shows up and zaps everyone, and then we're just trapped in the TARDIS interminably. Now, I like what Davison does here. I like how he goes back and does little impressions of his predecessors. Like, that's cool. And I like the symbolism of him slowly tearing apart Tom Baker's scarf. That, I mean, there are bits of it that are great. And, him trying to build little relationships with his companions, like that stuff's fine. But it's like Tegan and Nissa, like, standing still over the TARDIS console, like, wondering what they're going to do. And, oh, IF stands for index file, and it's like, oh my god, like, can we please keep going with the story? And then, okay, so we're done with that, we land on the planet, all right, great. And then we spend most of episode 2 just like wandering through the woods. And again, there's cute moments there, like when Nissa falls in the swamp, and so forth. Like, I'm not saying this is awful Doctor Who or anything like that. It's still got its entertaining points. It's just, you can, it doesn't have the same cohesiveness that like Keeper of Traken and Legopolis did. Like, I feel like season 19 feels a little more threadbare in general than season 18, and the first half of this story kind of illustrates that. But overall, though, I like Castrovalva quite a bit. If only just for that second half, actually within the city, because there are so many great ideas there, and there's so much great characterization. Like, it's a strong story. I would not put it as my favorite of the season by any means, but as first episodes for Doctors go, it's quite good.
Just going back to your point about sort of picking up where the previous season left off, I guess season 7, sort of. Not as sort of explicitly as this, but,
Not if you believe in season 6B.
well, there is also that. But in terms of where the
Right.
War Games ends and where
Sure.
Spearhead begins, the War Games says this is going to happen, and Spearhead, it has happened. But that's all I've got on that one. Yeah, you're right. This is the first time that, well, as I said before, we're literally picking up 90 seconds after what happened before in a situation still. And I like that. It's the fact that the characters are in a situation. We're not cozy in the TARDIS or cozy in the Doctor's lab. We are very much out and vulnerable, and yeah, I think it works quite well. It does go on a bit. I like the TARDIS stuff. I like explorations of the TARDIS, and I do think what that first episode does just kind of provides a little bit of breathing space after Legopolis, but still sort of keeps the threat up as well. But the stuff around the woods is a little bit slow, but it's very beautifully filmed. So let's add that as a positive at least. Well, let's move on. Let's move on to what I admit is a story I am going to struggle to say nice things about. For to Doomsday. This is just it's flawed. That's the only word I can kind of come up with, really. Okay, so this is the one they filmed first. They did it to give Davison a chance to settle in before Castrovalva. This isn't anything big, weird, or surprising. This is sort of fairly standard, or certainly was fairly standard in TV. I think Davison's perhaps the first Doctor to not record his first episode first, but he's certainly not the last. In fact, have any new series Doctors recorded their first episode first? I suppose Tennant did with Christmas Invasion. Yeah, I'm gonna have to read a bit more into that one, but it's the point is it's not weird practice to do so. So, For to Doomsday was the first recorded, and we can tell Davison looks nervous as hell. His hair is shorter than it will be for the rest of his era. Hasn't quite settled into how he's going to play the character yet, and unfortunately, I just don't think he's got that brilliant a material to work with. There's some good concepts in here, the idea of the Abankan ship revisiting Earth and grabbing people, and people aren't people, they're androids, and there's a mesh of different cultures, and it's all a bit sinister, but it doesn't particularly hold together particularly well. It's like there's a lot of half-baked okay ideas that kind of they don't quite stick together, I guess. Some good performances. I think it's a memorable story. I don't think it's a forgettable story, but I just don't think it's particularly great. I don't think it's particularly coherent, and it before I said Castrovalva kind of works within the means. It challenges what the series can achieve, but it sort of works within the boundaries of what can be achieved. I think this just asked for too much, and I think the whole cricket ball in space sequence is some of the most ridiculous stuff we've ever had in Doctor Who. I don't think it works. It's not a particularly entertaining sequence. It's not edge of my seat kind of gripping sort of stuff. It is just the Doctor is milling about space with a little bit of a threat going on back on the Abankan ship, but it never really feels like the Doctor's in any danger. The nearest thing to compare it to is the spacewalk sequences, plural, in Frontier in Space, which are purely there just to stretch the episode out to its allotted time, and that kind of feels like it's what's going on here. It's not a dreadful story, but it's certainly flawed, and I just don't think it has a lot going in its favour, and I kind of wish Davison had some better material to work with as the first one he recorded. It's a shame, really, that they didn't record maybe the Visitation first, which just gives him a little bit more to play with, I guess. So, Jimmy, For to Doomsday, go for it.
Well, I think I liked it a lot more than you did. There's definitely quite a lot of faults, but I think there's quite some good stuff too. Particularly with the Doctor, with Davison not having yet settled into the role, the way he plays some things a bit differently, it's actually really interesting to see, and it's very Doctorish, but it's very different to what his version of the Doctor is usually like. Like, I noticed particularly the Doctor's reaction to Monarch and Persuasion's introductions, his sort of comeback lines were played very Tom Bakerish, and likewise when he first uses the Sonic to stop the Monoptic and spin it about or whatever, he has this big cheesy grin on his face, and it's just it almost feels like it should be his first story because he very much is still similar to Tom Baker's portrayal, like he hasn't settled in yet, and I find that quite interesting. Um, yes, but coming back to the main bulk of the story, I think the concepts in that are probably better than some of the execution. I think saving these individuals from history and taking them with you and turning them into androids. Like, there's a lot of interesting stuff there, but I think some of the execution is really pretty bad, and especially some of the bits that come across quite racist. I mean, like, um, particularly the bit where Bygone is talking about how, oh no, the promise of ruling over my culture group didn't appeal to me at all because we civilized Greeks believe in democracy, unlike these other primitive races. It's like, oh, yikes. And especially the bit where I can see what they were trying to do, but having Tegan translate the Aboriginal Australian language from like tens of thousands of years ago, it doesn't really make sense that still be it's the specific culture of the specific area that she was, and because there's like over 300 or 400 different languages in Australia of the native culture, and like it's yeah, she just happens to know the exact right one, and like, okay, they're trying to give her something useful to do, cool idea, but logically it doesn't work, especially when Bygone and Lin Fu too are talking perfect English. Like, okay, why does the Australian need special translation and they don't? Like, it just comes across really bad. And another thing in the execution that really didn't work was the android's faces. Like, when Bygone lifts his face up to show the circuitry, and I mean, the special effects are worse than the Tom Baker android stories. Like, in those, they actually sort of built fake eyes for Sarah, and the face actually came off. Whereas here, they're lifting up the faceplate, and the face doesn't move. Like, his eyes are still there when that's where the chin should be. Like, they clearly couldn't do it right on the budget, but you'd think there should have been a better way than this. Other things that I would say is interesting is it's good that Tegan gets to a bit more to do, like especially when she beats Adric to go back to the TARDIS. I mean, the execution and the choreography or whatever didn't look very good, but at least character-wise, it was a good thing. And again, giving her the chance to get into the TARDIS and try to fly it, yeah, cool idea, but um, her reaction and her struggling and the sort of laughing, crying fit, it's very hammy and over the top and not very well acted. Like, I'm sure she was doing the best she could as an actress. That it wasn't played very well, and I would also say that Adric's another interesting one. Like, he's siding with the villains straight away, and he's completely fooled by them. And like in some later stories, he's clearly faking that and just trying to get information or whatever, and it works well. But here, he's just a brainless idiot, and I love the bit where the Doctor's pretending to agree with him and be so apologetic, and Davison plays it so well. And the second that they're not being spied on, he's like, "Listen to me, you bloody idiot!" It's the change in his performance. Davison did really well with that. Not so much Waterhouse. It's a pity, but yeah, I think they tried to do a lot of good stuff, but the execution again, And another one that was particularly bad was the way the Doctor made that sort of racist joke, like, "I'm Lin Fu too. Oh, you look perfectly well." Oh, what? What are you doing? It's so ironic because in the next story, Kinder, you have the sort of colonization parallels, and there's some bad execution there, but like they're at least seeing that, looking on a society's primitives is not the right thing to do. But Forge Doomsday is just like, yay, let's all be racist for a bit. It's yeah. I think I enjoyed the story more while I was watching it, but the more I read my notes and talk about the things I noticed, it just gets worse and worse. It's yeah, not handled very well. I think the story concept had a lot of potential, but the execution was rubbish.
Yeah, I think concept good, execution bad is definitely the flavour of this one. What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. This is probably my least favorite Fifth Doctor story. I even like Time Flight better than this, so yeah, I think that's pretty much your only two contenders.
Jesus.
If you're
Like,
saying
wow.
Time Flight's good, that's a sign of how bad you think it is. Holy shit!
Bloody hell.
I mean, maybe when I haven't rewatched Time Flight, maybe I will change that opinion. But I don't know. At least there's like some I don't know. Don't make me choose. It's terrible. Look, there again. There's good ideas here. Like even though Jimmy's right, like there are some expressions in here that come across as unfortunately racist, paternalistic, colonialistic, and some of that's just driven by the attitudes of the Urbankans, sure, but at the same time, like you can see the show sort of acknowledging the idea that like some cultures are more quote unquote advanced than others, and that gets into iffy territory. But I do like though that it's trying to be so openly multicultural. Like, I mean, yes, it's ridiculous that Tegan speaks that particular language, but it's also just nice to see like Aboriginal culture represented on screen, like acknowledged as part of human culture, and I like the idea of having this like these gatherings where you watch like the various ceremonies of different cultures like that. That's really neat too. The only problem is that like these scenes are shot so flatly. Like it's you start seeing the problem here that you see reach its nadir like later on in Warriors of the Deep, where everything's really brightly lit. And so like when you have these performances, like the Chinese dragon scene or whatever, it looks less like you know uh, a culture in celebrating itself in an alien place, as it looks more like, yeah, they had these costumes and props in the back room and we're just gonna parade them through this empty set. Like it really just doesn't look good. um the other big issue I have with this story is in the characterization, because I mean this is the first one they filmed. So, Davison's got to find his feet here. And I mean, he's certainly not bad. I mean, but like Johnson said, he's very nervous. You can see that in his acting. And when you're, doing a debut story for someone, you want the rest of your, cast to kind of be carrying the load so that the new lead can find his feet. And yet here they decide to basically change two of the three companion characters. Like Adric, up until this point, I mean, I know there are people that dislike him, and I've never been one of them. Like he's not the best companion. Certainly, Matthew Waterhouse is charitably not very good in his performances, but there's appeal to him, and I think we've said before that like his relationship with Tom Baker was, and especially when Romano was there, like was great. Like they it's kind of like mad, you know, relatives like showing a younger kid like the universe and so on. But in this story, he turns the petulance, like the teenage petulance, up to 11, and everything else like goes away. Like he goes off on bizarre misogynist rants. Like he right away like he's just 100% completely taken in by whatever ridiculous story the Urbankans are telling him. Like in this story, I watch Adric and I'm like, why are you not kicking him out of an airlock? Like he's at his most annoying here, which is a shame because again, like he's generally a decent character, but in this story, no. And then Tegan, like, yeah, I mean, they try to give her a couple of moments, like with speaking the language and so forth, but they make her defining character trait here. I hate this. I want to go home. And that doesn't really work because like you're I mean it is certainly a believable character thing. I don't think that if you took any random person and put them in Doctor Who they would want to keep adventuring, but like here she's just like whining about wanting to get back to her job and not like comprehending that there's time travel, so it doesn't really matter. And like it's she becomes more unlikable here too, and that doesn't carry forward into every single story. I mean, obviously in Kinda you don't get a hint of it, but like there's to make this TARDIS crew work, like you need to write them well, and I don't think this story does that at all, and that really gives it something difficult to get over. That being said, there's are parts I do I like. I think the Urbankans just in general, like all three of them, are great characters. Like Monarch is fantastic. Like that's a in a better story, we would remember Monarch as a classic Doctor Who villain because Stratford Johns' performance is so good, and he and Peter Davison really bounce off of each other well. But unfortunately, it's just surrounded by threadbare, tedious, bad-looking stuff. Yeah, I don't like this story. I went into it with an open mind because I hadn't watched it in a long time, and I basically just came away from it realizing why I hadn't watched it in a long time and resolving not to do so for a similarly long time.
I have to admit, I think it's going to be a while before I go for this one again as well. I'd completely forgotten about Adric and his misogynistic rant. That was odd. Like Adric being a little bit treacherous can work. It near enough worked in State of Decay. Doesn't here at
Yeah, I
all.
mean, the Artful Dodger thing is, he's supposed to be not fully trustworthy. Like, that's fine, but this is just, ugh.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
like if
It's
he
just
was, if oh
strange.
sorry, if he was like convinced for some actual reason, or you could believe it character wise, it might work. Like State of Decay worked so well because like he didn't trust the vampires and he was just trying to pretend to A, survive, and B, hopefully turn on them. Whereas here it's like, oh, I genuinely believe everything that Monarch says, and it's like, well, why? Like they needed to do something with the script to make it a bit more believable, to give that sort of tie, because if he'd had a legitimate reason to believe, it might have worked a lot better.
The one thing I kind of will say about this story, because it's absolutely right to say it's a terrible story for Adric and Tegan. Like, neither of them come across as great in this. It is quite a good story for Nyssa. Nyssa does kind of have a head screwed on and is the Doctor's most loyal companion. And I do like sort of Nyssa's, not that she gets to do much, but I do like her, what she does in this story, how the character's handled. And seeing as for the next few stories now, Nyssa is going to be pretty much completely sidelined. It's good that she does get a at least half decent run here, because she's she's hardly in Kinder at all. She spends a good chunk of the Visitation in the TARDIS building a android destroying machine, and but the Earthshock later on, she spends more than half of that stuck in the TARDIS. Nyssa actually gets a pretty poor run this season, so this is one of Nyssa's better stories, which is a shame because Nyssa's a good character, but um, at least there's that. At least it got one companion right. Yay. Let's move on to Kinder then. So Kinder's a curious one. Kinder, I think, is very Marmite in the same way that Warrior's Gate, for example, is. I seem to remember that Greg and I both quite liked Warrior's Gate, and Jimmy wasn't a big fan. And Kinder kind of Kinder is the Warrior's Gate of this season. It's the one that plays with bigger concepts and leaves things for the audience to interpret, and it's all a little bit sort of kaleidoscopic in its approach to narrative and that kind of thing. Some great ideas, some very great performances. Like Simon Roos has got to be one of the best guest actors classic Doctor Who had. I think Hindle's sort of portrayal in this is brilliant, really, really well done. I believe this one got voted the weakest story of the season in Doctor Who magazine's poll at the time, but I also think it's had a fair sort of reassessment since. I do like this one. I find it fascinating. It is one that I have to properly sit and watch. Like Four to Doomsday, you can have on in the background and you don't miss a thing. Whereas this one, you actually have to pay attention to it. You have to watch it. You have to follow it. It's visually excellent, with the obvious exception introduction of the snake at the end, and as far as I'm concerned, when they fixed that for the DVD, they sorted that out. I like the new version. I will always watch the new version. I don't see why anyone would watch the old version, because that snake is just dreadful. So yeah, interesting story, full of interesting ideas, interesting characters. It asks a lot of the viewer. It's not all sort of laid out clearly. It does sort of dip in places. Adric's a little bit insufferable again, and he trots over to the villain side for a little while as well. Who'd have thought it? Oh, but he's not really, of course. But yeah, there is a real sense of threat in this one that you don't get as strongly in other stories, but I think it's mainly down to just one very brilliant, unhinged performance that kind of holds the whole thing together. In terms of sort of sets, maybe not the best story ever, but in terms of visual trickery, I think this is a very strong one. I'm going to get it in now, though. I do prefer Snake Dance. Of the two Mara stories, Snake Dance is by far my favourite of the two. But I think that this is by no means a bad story. So Jimmy, talk to us about Kinder.
Well, I'll say first off, it's been a while since I watched Snake Dance, but I definitely would agree with you based on my memories of it that it's a lot better. As to the comparison to Warrior's Gate, I think this is a bit similar in some ways, but I think this story is slightly less bad because I think it's slightly better written, slightly better acted, and slightly less pretentious. But that is not saying much. It's there's a lot of good moments and good bits, but the overall thing doesn't kind of work. I mean, there's I think just the portrayal of the native people, the Kinder, it sort of doesn't really work. It comes across weird, like the whole only the women sometimes get voiced and not the men. It's like, well, okay, if you had like what is the difference? Like, why are they special? And some of the pretentious stuff, like the scenes in Tegan's mind, are just such a load of wank. Basically, they're just almost entirely guff. It's pointless, over the top, talking about nothing, making it. Yeah, I just did not like that stuff at all, and I think some of the execution was pretty bad of that as well. Like I agree with you, the DVD version with the snake is much better, but also on the Mara possessed people front, there's this weird pink stuff on Tegan and Aris's teeth when they do it, and it's like, I don't know if they were trying to make it look like they were bloody or venomous to go with the snake thing, but it just looked like they both had an accident putting on lipstick. It just looked really weird and stupid. Um, and yeah, the vision of doom that they have at the end of episode 3, and it's like, oh no, clocks are ticking. It's just, yeah, really really stupid. And there's also the stuff like when Panna dies before she possesses the other one, the doctor waves his hand in front of her face to check if she's still seeing. And it's like, you established this character was blind. Why are you waving your hand in front of her eyes? What are you doing? And the dialogue trying to make things sound like they make sense, like the bit where the doctor's talking about, don't you see? And then Tegan's blunt, confused, no. And it's like, that was probably intended seriously, but it was just so funny. And again, later when the doctor's like, it's all quite logical. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, sure, doc. And at the end, when they capture the giant snake Mara in the circle, they make big points in the dialogue multiple times about, you have to close the gaps. You can't leave a single gap. And both times the doctor says it, you zoom in on a shot of the mirrors with huge gaps that they're doing nothing about. It's like, the execution was terrible. But yeah, there is stuff that I quite like. I like the fact that there's that little scene where Adric's doing the magic with the disappearing coin or whatever, and the Doctor either being fooled or genuinely playing along to make him happy is kind of sweet. I like the way the dynamic between the Doctor and Todd is really brilliant. I wouldn't agree with it myself, but I've seen a lot of people online back in the day saying actually Todd should have been a companion, and yeah, they really work better together, and there's less bickering than with Tegan or Adric. And I think another thing with the world building that I did like some of the execution of the native Kinder people was bad, but I liked just the throwaway line, like where what's her name, the younger seer prophetess, where she says the bit about having 7 fathers, and she's sort of worried about the Doctor when he's only got one, and it's like, oh, that must be tough. And it's like, yeah, make the alien societies more alien. Stuff like that is really good, and I like seeing it. Also, what else? I would also say you definitely miss Nissa a lot in this story, because she's my favourite Fifth Doctor companion, and as you say, she doesn't get much to do in quite a lot of this season, and so it's sad to see her sidelined, entirely gone from the middle part of the story and barely in the first and last episode. Um, but yeah, I think you can definitely see what the story was trying to do, and I think they mostly did it well, but again, there's so many just throwaway things that they didn't. Like, the other one I would say is there's a bit where when Panna is criticizing the Mara possessed Aris, and she has a line about what was it? Yeah, she one of the things she insults him with is saying that he's blind, as in like blind to logic or something. But like having a character who is literally blind, calling someone else blind as an insult is just really cringy, really bad stuff. Um, Another funny thing I noticed was the delta wave augmenter that puts Nissa to sleep. They say in the new series that in the finale of Eccleston's season, he's building a delta wave, and it's like, oh yeah, that just blows the brains out of everyone, Dalek or human alike. And it's like, keep track of your techno babble, because like, what is Five trying to explode Nissa's mind? And I mean that's the fault of the later story for doing it differently, but yeah, another little weird thing I picked up on. The other funny one I thought was when the Mara Aris calls Panna old woman, and I just instantly thought, no, sorry, mate, you're 18 seasons late for that. But I did enjoy rewatching it. For all its faults, it was a lot more enjoyable than, say, Four to Doomsday. So, I mean, it's obviously not that bad if you're still enjoying it, even while you're criticising it. So, there's a point.
I'd never noticed the parting of the ways connection before, but yeah, that's maybe the Ninth Doctor was actually just trying to put all of the Daleks to sleep.
Oh, I did forget that there was one other funny line I liked. The bit where they're talking about the older soldier, and they have the line, "It's another male, old, red-faced, the one who shouts," and it's like, Doctor Who in an exciting adventure with the gammon.
30 years too early. Brilliant. Go on, Greg, talk to us about Kinder.
I think the biggest issue with Kinda is that it doesn't really know like what it wants to be doing, because there's basically just two different stories going on here, and and it tries to set up like some deep thematic stuff, and it never really follows through on much of it. If you think about it, like the story of the Mara and the native population is almost completely disconnected from the story of the human expedition and Kindle's madness and so forth. You could really cut either one of those elements completely out and have a good, very good, even 2 episode Doctor Who story focusing on one or the other. But you have them both, and they never really come together until the end, when they're just sort of forced to come together. And it never feels coherent. It never feels natural. There's a lot that's being set up like an episode, early on. Like the story is, very clearly using Christian symbolism about the snake invading the Garden of Eden. I mean, there is a point at which Tegan is sitting in a tree with a snake tattoo on her, or image, or whatever you want to call it, on her arm, dropping apples on the head of one of the natives, and it's like, okay, like I get it. Like this is very clearly one thing you're doing, and that's fine. But like they don't they never really follow any of those disparate elements out to their natural conclusions. I mean, there's all this great stuff in there about, mirrors and being a gateway into the soul, and yet, like, at the end of the story, it's okay. We need to put the Mara in a giant circle of mirrors, and it's just this kind of mechanistic resolution to this philosophical idea, and it doesn't really work. And I mean, the giant snake, I don't care. Like, it's Doctor Who. Like, giant snakes are going to look bad. I do obviously prefer the new one for the DVD release, but I can watch the old one. That's not really an issue for me. And like, I feel like Tegan here, it's like her first story to really take center stage, and it you really think that, like, she should be changed by this, like, after her experiences of being possessed and bringing this deadly spirit into existence. Like, you would think she would be a changed person at the end of it, but she's not. Like, when she's released from the Mara's control, she's just right back to being exactly the same character, and that doesn't make any sense, really. I mean, okay, so you say, like, well, she doesn't remember it, but that was your decision. Like, you didn't have to write that. Like, why not have her be impacted? Like, okay, they're showing little scenes of her, like, trying, like, the Mara is preying on her insecurity, and preying on her, like, sense of abandonment and not feeling like part of the TARDIS crew and so forth. Okay, well, then, like, by the end of the story, she should be overcoming that. She should feel like a natural part of the crew and have her, her constant desire to return to Heathrow, like, be lessened. But that's not the case. They just reset her, and then, obviously they couldn't have Nissa in the story because of contract stuff, and it's a shame because I think she would be obviously a good addition to the story, like Jimmy was saying. But it's a better story for Adric, certainly, than the previous one, which is not hard. But he's like, even so, like, right near the end of the story, like, after Tegan recovers, Adric just, like, goes at her about, oh, this is all her fault, and it's like, you know, I never, like, again, I understand this character's supposed to be a little annoying and a little untrustworthy, but like he's just a complete bastard for no reason at all, and I don't understand why. Like, I just don't. It doesn't sit right with me. So, like, I don't dislike Kinda as a story just because I am a big ideas person, and the fact that this is throwing up so many interesting ideas, like, it works for me. I can kind of settle into its atmosphere, but it's just, I agree that Snake Dance is better because Snake Dance actually, like, has solid themes that carry throughout, whereas this feels very disconnected. And maybe it's because Bidmead was the script editor on episode one, and then Sayward was the script editor on the rest of it, and, like, they just weren't on the same page. I don't know, but it's a very flawed story. I don't think it's the worst of the season by any stretch of the imagination, but at the same time, like, I've seen people reevaluate it as this work of genius, and I don't see that either.
Yeah, I've often wondered with this one, before I mentioned the narrative somewhat kaleidoscopic, is that I've always sort of wondered, is it deliberate? Is it, or to what extent is it deliberate, I should say? Like, it clearly does sort of jump all over the place. And like you say, there's a couple of plots going on and they do have to be forced together. Um, so yeah, I just sort of wonder how much of the disconnect of this one is deliberate. Is it meant to kind of feel jarring in places, or is that just a thing that happened, a fault with it? It's an interesting story, and I think it's one that sort of always will be rediscussed and reevaluated. And um, at least the persistent Kate Bush wrote this one under a pseudonym rumour seems to have disappeared entirely now. But yeah, I like Kinder, but we'll come to Snake Dance when we do season 20. I much, much, much prefer it. Interesting, sort of going back to what Jimmy was saying before about how Todd should have been a companion. It's interesting and arguably a missed opportunity. The Big Finish did cast Nerys Hughes as a companion. She played Margaret in the Fourth Doctor Adventures, and I absolutely loved that run. Wouldn't change it for the world, but weird that we've never brought back Todd and given her a bit more time with the Fifth Doctor, and maybe even had her fill in as a short-term companion or whatever. It's kind of weird that Big Finish haven't gone with that one. They brought back the Mara, and Nerys Hughes does appear in Big Finish relatively often. So yeah, maybe there's an opportunity there. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't sacrifice the Fourth Doctor, Leader, and Margaret series for any of that. I think it's a fantastic run. Okay, well, that's the three stories that we'd planned to discuss today. We're into the Fifth Doctor era now. We will pick up in a future episode, obviously, season 19. So we will talk about the Visitation, we will talk about Black Orchid, we will talk about Earthshock, and of course Greg's favourite, Time Flight. We shall do that in the future, and I feel as though Greg might sue me for slander after saying that, but never mind.
Oh no, I'll do much worse to you than that.
But in the meantime, we shall leave it there. So we will return soon to discuss the second part of season 19. But thank you very much for listening. I shall say goodbye to Jimmy.
Thanks. See you next time.
And I'll say goodbye to Greg.
Can't wait for part 2.
Indeed, it should be good. Goodbye now.